All right. Thank you. This is the City of Rollingwood Utility Commission meeting for Tuesday, May 2nd. We will begin with roll call.
Chris Kirksey.
Clark Wilson.
Jonathan Miller.
Christopher Meekin.
Elizabeth Brand.
That is completed. We're moving on to public comments. I didn't see anyone sign up, but just asking if anyone has. No one has signed up for public comments, so moving on to the consent agenda, which is a discussion and possible action on the April 4th, 2023 Utility Commission meeting minutes. Everyone has had a chance to review. Looking for a motion to approve.
I move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll abstain, I wasn't here, so.
It passes anyway. Moving on to the regular agenda, and this is the presentation and discussion regarding the proposed installation of network facilities by Google Fiber Texas. And we will turn it over to the representative from Google in a moment. This was a presentation that was given to the City Council at the last council meeting, and the council has asked that the Utility Commission also have an opportunity to view the presentation. And so with that, I will turn it over.
Perfect timing. Hi, my name is Sasha Petrovic. I'm the general manager for the Southwest region for Google Fiber. So I cover, yeah. How do we know each other?
McCombs.
You're a professor. I was like about to Google you. I was like, he was my professor back in the day. I was like, wait, Meeks? I was like, it looks so familiar. You look younger.
Got a haircut. He's working.
Yeah, you did. All right, there we go. Yeah, class of 2014. Well done. Best professor I've ever had. There you go.
Keep working, yeah.
Our vote doesn't matter, just saying that.
Lead up here.
There we go. I didn't know. All right. So I live in Westlake Hills. So that's part of why I normally don't. I have a team that does this as part of our normal expansion efforts. I've kind of personally shepherded Rollingwood because I live 5 minutes away and I have about a dozen friends that live here. So you guys are stuck with me versus the folks who actually do this for a living. All right. Today we're just going to walk through a quick presentation. I'd probably index more to questions and have it be a little bit interactive just because the presentation can get a little bit boring, but I just want to maybe anchor everybody in into like what's happening to set a foundation. Then we'll kind of open it up and you guys interrupt and jump in as you ask questions. So I'm going to probably fly through these slides fairly quickly, but there's nothing earth-shattering here. So Google Fiber is an Alphabet company. Alphabet is basically Google. It's just kind of a structure that's been established. We just were started as a thought that the founders felt that historically the U.S. was underserved by internet. There was a lack of competition, and they wanted to be disruptive. So Google Fiber was born about 10 to 12 years ago as kind of an incubated project and has slowly evolved and matured to be, I would say, a very prominent business line within the Google umbrella. We are all over the U.S. and we are spreading. So everywhere where there's green, you can see we have existing assets under our Google Fiber. We did buy a company called WebPass. That's a radio kind of deployment. We have some of that in Austin and San Antonio. It's basically like point to point, not very relevant for where we are today. And we have been growing. We announced 4 states in the last 6 months as well. So we are an organization that is moving forward with growth in mind. This is just a quick zoom in terms of where we are today. If you look at this map, green is active network. So anyone that lives in the green area can sign up for Google Fiber at the moment. Anywhere in blue is where we're currently engineering and designing. So this is part of the Westlake Hills kind of piece where we just signed a right-of-way agreement with Westlake Hills. And as part of that, we're going to be building that area as well as some of the unincorporated Travis County areas around it. And you can see Terrytown across the way, which has nothing on it yet. We haven't made our way there just yet. So this is a long, kind of expensive, arduous build. We've been in Austin building for about 8 years, and we're still not done. We've recently just signed Round Rock, Texas. We signed an agreement with Travis County. We have an agreement with Sunset Valley, Leon Valley down in San Antonio, the city of San Antonio, and probably about 6 or 7 other jurisdictions. And we're in conversations with about a dozen or so as well, just to kind of fill in the gaps as we're looking at completing the Austin and Central Texas build here. So just wanted to kind of highlight where we are. with Rollingwood being in the yellow. And part of the conversation here is, and I heard some whispering while I was trying to get the AV to work, we are going to be coming right past Rollingwood. So with that comes kind of fixed cost to do some of these what we call trunk lines to feed these areas. And while we're doing that, we can pop over and feed the area of Rollingwood as part of our overall deployment within Blue, right? If we don't get to Rollingwood as we're doing the Blue area, there's a good chance that it just is kind of a donut hole, because it would be very cost prohibitive to remobilize an entire construction machine to come back and just kind of fill in the yellow area. So just being a little bit, I would say, overly transparent as to partially not a super sense of urgency, but a sense to say, hey, we're already papered up with Travis County as well as Westlake Hills. We've got engineering in flight. We'd love to dovetail these in together, because then it actually makes the economics closer to working. They still are a little bit off for us because it's quite expensive to kind of build in this area, but we can make some justifications to fill in some of the pockets. I'll kind of pause there. Are there any questions on this map?
Well, I have just a general question. So AT&T Fiber didn't come to us and ask for permission because they already had an agreement with us for installation of internet service?
The incumbents are working under what's called a video franchise that they do with the state of Texas, and it's kind of more administrative. We don't offer video anymore, so we're purely an internet provider. So we have to sign individual city right-of-way agreements with whoever we kind of go to establish a working relationship. The way the law worked in the past is everything was video. So you had kind of your DSL providers, and then you had your cable providers. And so the video franchise kind of got dovetailed because you need the same infrastructure to have video at your home. And then they were able to kind of bridge that and offer internet on top of that. So that's a reason why that worked in terms of how they probably approached it. And do you guys have AT&T Fiber here?
We do. And
Yes.
parts
Okay.
of
They
it
don't bury it. So,
it's on the
No,
It's
it's
on
on pole.
It's aerial.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
the difference.
That Sasha, that was the only question, kind of why I came is, it's limestone. You gotta dig through limestone. Why can't you go on the poles?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we will
I'll
address
wait,
that.
I'll wait.
No, yeah, that's a great question. That's why we're here with I have some show and tell stuff I'm going to pass out as well. And you knew I was coming.
I try to plant a plant in my backyard, and I pull it.
Yeah, we have special ways to plant plants, though. So, all right. What we offer, this is just a quick view. We have a 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig, 8 gig is coming. So our speeds are, it's like the Ferrari of internets, and it's all symmetric at the 1 gig. 2 gig is 2 down, 1 up. And then what that means is most providers, and I don't know what AT&T Fiber does, because if they're not a pure fiber build, like sometimes they'll do last mile that's fiber, and then they'll claim air quotes fiber. But if you look at the speed, you're not really getting fiber speeds. Like we'll offer 1,000 down, 1,000 up, which means when you're uploading movies, it's like this. When you're downloading, it's like this. And then when your cameras are running in your house and you have all the connected devices, like everyone now is, and I think I have 85 devices in my house connected between like light switches, cameras, washer and dryer, just all these small things. And that's a lot of pull on it. So the symmetric piece really actually matters a ton as you move into kind of that next evolution of what we call the Internet of Things. And then we have some commercial stuff as well. We're number one, according to a lot of people. Customers like us a lot. I think Ashley's a customer. Yeah, she is. There we go. Hoot, hoot. And this is a local team, right? So I live here. I live down the street. All of my council members now have my address at hand, so they know where to find me if there's ever an outage, which is good. I guess for them, not for me. But we've got a team here where we have an office right next to St. Edward's University. I've got about 110 people, FTEs, another probably 500 or 600 vendors and contractors. So, call it a team of about 1,000 that lives, sleeps within Central Texas. They work between as far north as Round Rock and as far south as kind of downtown San Antonio and everywhere in between. All right. This is a quick journey life cycle of how this works, and this is a very simplified version. We start with the right-of-way license agreement, which we've already passed on to the city. This is kind of a standard, boilerplate contract that we have that all those municipalities that I spoke about earlier have signed to a degree, right? There's usually some tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's fairly static, right? Like for us, consistency is key to being able to operate efficiently. If we have 25 different ways that we're signing agreements, then our crews can't work as efficiently. You're going to get a worse product. It's kind of like, imagine if you build a car facility and everyone's just a little bit different to build the same car, you're going to get defects as part of it. So we try to be pretty consistent on that, and we're in the process. I think your legal team's looking at that at the moment. All that does is just create a relationship. We could sign a right-of-way agreement today and never do any work because we have to have a permit. So the right-of-way agreement just talks about the terms of the agreement, if we're going to fix things when they break, that we leave things in the same way we found it, as well as a fee that we pay to access the right-of-way as well. So all of that just outlines the agreement. And again, if there's no work being done, it just kind of sits there and hangs out. Once that's executed, we'll then go through kind of fiber optic design. That then turns into a permitting process. We'll then submit those permits. Those will get reviewed, hopefully approved. And then we start construction. And our targeted, method will be underground construction in Rollingwood. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that looks and feels and why we can do it in the topography that we have here with the limestone. Once we've built the neighborhood, the city of Rollingwood, and we'll probably do that in 1 or 2 permit packages. Our normal permit packages in Texas are usually between 5 to 1,200 houses. It's about 560, 550 here in Rollingwood. So it's about, the size of a smaller, just, general package that we do in Austin and San Antonio. So we'll probably do 1 permit, maybe 2, just depends. We're doing 1 big one, I think, in Westlake Hills, just to administratively simplify things and not make this a big lift for everyone. But that's, again, something we can work through. Once it's built, then we do what's called customer fulfillment, which means every house in Rollingwood will have some fiber optic cable in front of it, and then they can sign up for service. And then when you sign up for service, you don't get the funny error of you're not eligible. Please input your information, and we'll let you know when we're here. Like, you'll be able to schedule an appointment, and then we'll roll a installation crew, and all of that happens on private property. So that the demarc for where we are between the general construction and customer fulfillment is kind of like public right-of-way and then to private property. And then we have crews that live 24/7, work on maintenance, repairs, relocations, anything that kind of happens. We have a construction hotline just like everybody else to adjust, make tweaks if we need to, or address any issues as it comes up. And that crew stays around kind of in perpetuity. So we've got an engineering group, we've got a construction capital group, and then we have an operations group. The operations group usually hangs out for perpetuity to keep the network up and running. And then the engineering group and construction group kind of move on to the next city as they expand the deployment. All right. That one's a little bit of a repeater. This here, we build these hut locations, which you can see it's just kind of like I think a 20 by 30 metal building. We don't need one here because we already have excess capacity in and around Austin, so that's a good thing. Normally this takes about a year to find land, build it, do like some trunk lines to it. Because we're already here, we have capacity in existing assets, which means we just get to tie in and do more of what we would call trunk routes and distribution routes. Then there's backbone that kind of comes in. That's really deep stuff that carries huge cable counts, and then trunk routes. It's kind of like a freeway system. You can think of I-10 as like the backbone, or I-35, and then trunk routes are kind of like the feeders that spur off of it, and then distribution routes are like all of our interior streets as they come into it. All right, so this is how it works to a degree, and this is a side profile view. So if you look at where the asphalt and road base, think of this as like a cake layer. Hopefully it makes sense. If not, because I even have team members who, on my sales team who don't understand what they're looking at when they see this. Take the curb and gutter area, and then you see the curb and gutter kind of connects with the road base and asphalt. Like in that seam is where we make our cut. There will cut depending on what type of cable we put. Usually the thicker the cable, it means the more fiber optic count, which means the more customers are on it. That goes deeper to protect it. If it's just residential, we can do that a little bit shallower because there's less risk that kind of comes into it. So we have a big saw that cuts anywhere from 16 to 8-inch cut within that area. It vacs it up, cleans it up nicely, and you're left with a really pretty little kind of open trench as it sits there. And I'll pass this out. This is like to scale the size of that, right? So think of the curb is here, the curb is that, this is the road. Does that make sense? Everyone kind of following? Mm-hmm. We just cut and we don't create a new water penetration seam. So you're basically already having hard concrete next to asphalt, and there's water that penetrates that. And all we're doing is cutting in that exact seam, and we'll cut usually between 3/4 to 1.5 inches wide. And it's this narrow, it's real skinny, it goes down. And then we put conduit on the bottom that rolls in there. This is 2 types of conduit, depending on the cable count. The orange one can obviously hold a bigger count. We'll probably do more of this green stuff here. And then once that's done, this is your actual fiber optic cable. It just kind of slides in there. And then this will basically be underground and just be running right parallel with that curb and gutter kind of seam. So I'll pass this around. And then we actually have this foamy thing. It's called backer rod to keep the conduit from floating and snaking and looking like a Loch Ness monster. We put this down. It just kind of keeps it tamped down while we put backfill in place. And all this backfill is, we've deployed millions and millions of miles of this in Texas. Like, this is, our bread and butter. It's gone through, we're happy to share the spec on it, but it's gone through all of the Austin, TxDOT, City of San Antonio, Travis County. So it's gone through its ringer, and it's a kind of a cocktail formula that we've specialized for our application. All right, so I'll pass this around if y'all.
So do you do the curb cut on each side of the street?
Curb cut's not there, y'all. I'll show you what that looks
I mean, not the curb cut, but the
parallel.
the seam.
Yeah. So think of all of the seams will just have this saw that cuts this really skinny notch in there. And then that's what we call the primary running line, which runs across the entire street. Then to service the homes, every other house we do what's kind of a saw cut, and we cut through the curb at a seam. That way we can have an entry point into each home. And we do that on every other home. And from there, this is the vault lid that houses our equipment. It's usually going to be just kind of a splice case in there that sits right there in the right of way. And then we pop this lid, we access it, and then this is what's used from a private property perspective as we kind of cut through. So have you guys seen this yet? You care to?
Like our water.
Looks like
Yeah,
a
we-
sprinkler box.
yeah.
That's exactly what I told everybody at council. It's a sprinkler. Yes, Chris.
At what decibel does that saw operate, and how long does it take to go across an average house, half acre?
We do in a working day, we'll do anywhere from 1,000 to 4,000 feet a day per crew. So if you think about per house, I'm assuming your average lot lines here are, 60 to 80 feet per house.
More like 100.
100. So yeah, just divide that by 3,000. So we can do, quite a bit. It's very fast. Like the way you can think of it is, if we're in front of your house in the morning, and you go to work, when you come back, we're gone. It's we don't park. I think Ashley told me there was a blog from 2016. We no longer, like, that methodology was too expensive, which is why that article was written, to be like, this is crazy, this is unsustainable. If you fast forward 4 months from that article, like, we actually paused the entire business because the founders were like, this is unsustainable. So we spent years tweaking, reworking, and that's where we kind of now have what's called our micro trenching kind of approach. Which I have a video here.
Our ordinance is 60 decibels, and I'm betting that's.
No, it'll be louder than that. Yeah,
So we're gonna have to deal with that.
yeah, it'll be louder than that for sure, as it kind of runs. Yeah, 60 decibels is,
That's what our ordinance says.
yeah.
And it's exceeded all.
Mm-hmm. I might be exceeding it with this microphone at 60, or getting close to it.
Just to readdress Clark's question, which is, on each street there is only one line, and you'll branch off of that, or is there one on each side of the
Both
road?
sides.
Okay. So
At both sides.
okay.
There might be some situations where it's not all the way. So if you take a standard street kind of center line footage, we multiply by about 1.75, 1.8. So if you think of that, there's about 20% of one side that doesn't have any footage, just based on our architecture. Because we'll do some street crossings, we'll do a few things, and we don't necessarily hit every inch of both sides. It's about 1.8 inch is a factor.
And do you do both sides of the street at the same time, or if you're, as you mentioned, if you're coming down our street in the morning on one side, you might be coming back a week later, depending on the schedule and how that'll work?
Yeah, exactly. We do no parking signs on one side to make sure that there's not an issue. This becomes a really big problem when you're in other parts of Austin that use street parking. Like, in Westlake Hills and in here, most people have driveways, and street parking is not as critical as it is in some areas of Austin. So we've dealt with some like very, very difficult stuff where there's cars that have been abandoned or haven't moved in 5 years that we have to kind of work around. So yes, we're used to making sure that there's availability on one side of the road and that we don't interrupt traffic. So there's always going to be, you can have thoroughfare on both sides.
So Sasha, you mentioned there's a curb cut and you come up onto our property.
Correct.
I can see people getting upset about that and not wanting you to do that. How does that play out?
Yeah, surprisingly, it's pretty rare because we have hundreds of thousands of houses that we've done that, and some will get upset. Not a big number because they kind of, most homeowners, even though it's kind of technical, they understand that there's a right of way. They don't actually own that area, right? They know that there's public utilities and there are easements and there's curbs and all of that, and we stay within that space. We'll get every now and again somebody who gets worked up about it. We'll talk to them. We'll explain it. We'll work through it. There hasn't been a lot of situations where it gets like litigious. Usually, like people are normally like, hey, I get it. There's stuff here. Like I have water meters and gas meters and electrical manholes and all that. So we're not like in your front door. So we're just like usually 5 feet off or within that right of way. But
And you said you do that micro cut, but there's pipes and lines and stuff, and we don't even know where all the pipes and lines are. We don't have as built.
yeah, so we locate companies will come out and locate all their assets, right? They'll put paint on the ground. Then we will go and daylight everything that kind of comes in. So we'll core and pothole and make sure that we have good separation. And then the good part about our deployment is we are normally in that less than 16-inch range. And more often than not, all the utilities are out of the way. There are situations where they are, but like all gas should be at 36. Water's usually at 36. Sewage is going to be deeper and all of that. We'll nick it every now and again. The thing that we hit the most by an order of magnitude are sprinkler lines. So our crews, they carry couplings and, half-inch, three-quarter-inch and all that fun stuff. So they've fixed, thousands of sprinklers that kind of come in because those are difficult to locate. We do hit water lines. We fix them. We fit gas lines. We fix them. So it's part of just the process. When you do 10 million feet of anything, stuff happens, right? And so we have experience daylighting and making sure that we're staying out of the way. Our goal is not to hit anything. Like we have a zero hit kind of policy, and when it happens, it's just we do a post-mortem and work through it. So the team works really, really diligently not to do that.
So, again, a little bit based on that point, not all houses have the utility where the fiber would go in between the houses where the houses are facing each other. Like, for instance, my water main is literally 100+ feet from my house because it's in between me and the neighbor. It's close to theirs. Super. So what do you do in those situations if you're putting it between two houses, but then you've got 100-some feet before you get to the next house?
Are you saying where you just tap in for the installation process?
To the home, yes.
Yeah, several things. Like one, we'll just run it the 100 feet and work through it. The other piece is we don't necessarily have to be on the power side where historically providers are. The way we can do it, like normally what we'll do is if there's a house here and a house here, we'll put a box kind of in the middle, and then we'll just go north into the homes, and then we'll just tee off, and like we'll do our installation that way. So we don't necessarily have to go and wiggle all the way around. Our the fiber optic isn't. There's no electricity running through it, so from a grounding perspective, it doesn't have to be on the power side. So there's the ability to put it to shorten the run if you need to from an installation perspective.
Or lengthen it.
Yeah.
In case maybe then you get into where does it go, and are people happy to have you digging up part of their yard that isn't in the right of way to get there?
Well, normally when people sign up for service, they kind of know, like they understand that, hey, you're getting service, so we're going to have to do the installation, which means it's going to come underground. We'll restore it as we can back to where it was, and then tee off into it. So they kind of, and we have crews that work with homeowners all the time, and an entire organization that kind of works through it. Every now and again, yeah, you get somebody who might not be happy with what happened, and we work through to get that resolved. All right. And then there isn't a situation where we do softscape. That's the other side. We just kind of go on the other side of the curb, and we can plow and do some work there as well. All right. So this is what the cut looks like. If you want to kind of just see it, it's just and that's your setup. It's kind of a train. In the very front, you see the yellow thing. That's a vac truck. So there's no wet cuts that we do. Everything gets cut. And then in the back, that's the micro trenching blade. You can see in the very, very back. There's a hose that runs through. It sucks all the spoils up, cleans everything nice and easy. And then we place conduit in that spoil, and then we backfill per the model that I kind of showed you out as well. So this is the train that goes and moves at about, like I said, 1,000 to 4,000 feet a day, just depending on how efficient the crews can be and the lay of the land that they're working in. And this is well above the 60 decibels because you have the trencher that's working to cut, and you have the vac truck that's working, and they're both, you know, fairly loud. They're not quiet by any stretch of the imaginations, but the reason why this works so successfully is the speed. Historically speaking, if you have a bore working in rock, you're doing 50 to 300 feet a day if you're lucky. And that's just for 8 hours, just pounding through limestone. We can get, you know, our best performance day is like 6,800 feet. So we've done over a mile of this completed within 1 day. And that was in San Antonio, was our record. So it is loud, but it passes your house quicker than it takes to get your lawn mowed, if you want to think about that. So if the noise of your lawn crew, you can deal with that. The speed at which we move by is a little bit quicker, probably.
So 2 questions. One on you did sort of very quickly go over the softscape option
Mhm.
of varying. If that happens, then that's not an elective that people are asking you know, into their yards. And I know it's not there right away, but it is still sodded and other things. Do you guys take care of that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so part of the right-of-way agreement contractually makes us restore everything to as it was or improved conditions. We won't do softscape here. I'm almost certain, just because there's too much rock. Softscape will work up in Round Rock, Georgetown, on the east side where there's less rock. So it's just a deployment toolkit. So think of what we do, kind of like Batman. He's got a bunch of stuff on his belt, and you use what makes sense at that moment. We still do a lot, boring when we need to, when it makes sense. We do aerial when it makes sense. We do softscape when it makes sense. Our default that we try to do the most, because it's the fastest, is going to be the micro trenching. But we have kind of a toolkit that allows us to address multiple things. Like where this doesn't work well sometimes is if there's not curbs, it gets a little bit tricky, but we have a good way to work around it. If the conditions of the roads are really bad, you get alligator cracks, and then the whole thing just starts splintering up, and then the trench collapses. So that's where we would normally pop off into the softscape if the roads are really, really in bad shape and we just cannot cut it. Because when you cut it, it's literally a clean, you can put a ruler in there. It's very clean, stable, and if roads are bad, it just starts crumbling onto itself. So we kind of have a toolkit that allows us to deploy as needed to be the quickest, least disruptive, and the most aesthetically pleasing.
And my other point is, I know that it would be. Sorry, is this better? Sorry. It would be super helpful. I know nobody can plan things out perfectly and know exactly what's going to happen every day, but it would be great if there was some place on our city site or whatever else that said, we're going to be doing these roads at this time and these roads at this time, so that should people wish to plan in advance and not be there because maybe they work from home or something like that, then they have a rough idea, rather than just somebody showing up and doing it, which happened to me last week with some boring, and that was not great.
Yeah. Our process is 48 hours before we start working, we'll put no parking signs on the street. So they know, like, hey, clear it, don't park in that area, because we don't want to have to work around your car. 7 days before we start, we drop these everyone gets a door hanger on their door with kind of all our information here. This is another show and tell. I'm going to pass it out. It's earth-shattering technology.
It works.
Yeah, it does. So everyone gets a door hanger. Everyone gets no parking. We would love to work with the city to put a schedule together. That's like, you know, at the end of the day, every resident is a potential customer. Like, we don't want to piss anybody off. So if we come in there and make a mess and it's loud and everyone's upset about it, then we don't get a lot of customers, and I get in trouble for spending a whole bunch of money doing something that doesn't have any financial return. So we're very, very inclined to doing a really good white glove job to make sure that, you know, the communication's appropriate, everyone feels informed, and then when it's done, everyone's like, man, that was great. Like, I'd love to sign up. Like, I think Google did a great job deploying. They're going to do a great job servicing kind of our neighborhood. So, we're all in on, you know, doing as much as we can to coordinate and, you know, keep people up to speed as much as we can. I think I have a few more slides, but none of these are super technical. Yeah, so you can see the on the right side where the curb is, that's where we don't put any sealant because we're not creating a new water penetration zone, and we have our flowable fill mix that's specially designed to, you know, kind of be impacted with a concrete to asphalt mix. We then have what's called kind of the curbless approach, which is when the trench is in the middle of the road. There we put a sealant to make sure there's no water penetration to create any failures. So again, we have a toolkit that's, I think, 700 pages long. It basically says whatever you like, any scenario that we've ever seen, we have a spec, we have a SOP, we have a standard around that outlines how we kind of operate and execute. Most of what we'll do here will be on that right side, at the curb and gutter seam, no sealant. That is kind of the playbook that I see for Rollingwood based on the topography that we're working with here. All right. This is just backfill. Just shows that we have a low strength and high strength depending on where we put it, just to make sure that we're keeping the integrity as needed. And then there's a bunch of FAQs. So this is just stuff mostly around the contract and some deployment. So I'll pause there. That was quite a bit, and open it up for just any general questions on how this works, the timing of it.
So how's it from the street to the back of my house? How would you get there? AT&T came from the pole, and they had to drill a new hole in my wall to get the fiber through into next to my TV.
So normally what we do is we'll have this box here. We'll pop it open. We'll usually run that line kind of to the homes, and then we'll take a right and find a spot on the side of the house, usually on the power side if we can. That makes sense. We'll put what's called a network interface unit on there. It's just a riser.
So you're trenching in
underground, yeah.
Underground next to my driveway or something like that.
Depending on where it works. It could be next to your driveway. It could be 50 feet from your driveway. Every house will be different. But it'll for the sake of imagination, just kind of imagine there's your lot line between you and your neighbor. If there's no fence, you're just kind of like in that middle zone to a degree. Then you tee off to the house. Then there's a riser that comes up to the side of the house. We have a plastic box, which is our demarcation. We'll coil up our fiber there. That gets kind of drilled in, screwed into the side of the house. It's just kind of a panel to a degree. From there, we will then find out where it needs to get installed inside the house. So this is all fiber optic cable. So we actually have to put what's called an optical network terminal. It's a little box like this that decodes the fiber optic into where you can use your all of your landline plugs that you would normally historically use. So then we'll say, hey, where do you need this to go in terms of how you work? If you have a media room or a media closet where you've got surround sound and I think a lot of houses have it here, that'll 9 times out of 10 be where they want to put it because it just plugs into the router and then in their WAP system. And normally where your current internet is where you'd like it. So we'll plug that there. Then we usually run it through the wall into an attic space, squiggle around wherever we need to, and then we'll drop that down and tie into that demarcation point on the outside. So you'll have, depending, every house is different. Sometimes we punch a hole into the garage, and then there's a cable that kind of pops up. Sometimes we go on the roof line and then go into the attic space. I just built a new house, so I have a piece of conduit that goes perfectly from that demarcation all the way to the media closet in my house, so I don't have to, mine's, kind of plug and play. I just pull the fiber optic cable all the way into my media closet room. So some people will have that as well. So it just depends on your specific situation.
So we have some, because of the way we're that little yellow bubble in the middle of things, we have several streets that border, that are, you know, on our borders. And some of those streets are served from utilities that come from poles that are on the border of Rollingwood or just outside of Rollingwood. And you already have service in some of those areas as well, and or will with Westlake. So do you just kind of make a call that says, on this street we have two options to service these houses, one on the back of the houses and one in the front of the houses, and we'll figure out if we're already there and which one is best?
Yeah, we have there's a whole engineering team that knows our toolkit front and back, and they'll just determine what's the best approach to kind of move forward. If the yellow area isn't signed and we don't have permits to do anything, we just don't touch any of the streets. Like, it's just it's an easy kind of call. If it is signed and we are kind of doing them together, we'll try and be as efficient as we can, just to make as little noise and go pretty quickly and kind of punch through it, right? So. That's all part of the optical design that takes place in terms of construction methodologies. And what they do is they'll do what's called a construction ride-out. So our engineering vendor will literally drive all the streets and look at everything and see if there's anything going on, like, you know, a water inlet, a culvert, anything that you can't, you know, sometimes see on Google Maps, or that it might not be transparent. And then they'll design on that. Once that's designed, that's vendor ABC. ABC doesn't actually do the deployment. They give it to, you know, a vendor 123. So then vendor 123 takes those prints once they've been approved, and then they go and do what's called construction right out. So then they go drive the whole thing and do what's called white lining. They'll spray, paint on where the line needs to be to make it somewhat dummy proof in terms of where we're going to deploy. And when they find things that, you know, pop up, or there's, you know, a manhole somewhere that we have to kind of work through, or bus pad, then we make field changes. And again, we do 10 million feet of this, you know, a year. I think Rollingwood is 35,000 feet maybe from a deployment perspective.
So you said you have an agreement signed with Westlake, but two of our borders is City of Austin.
Yeah, we have a City of Austin agreement. Yeah. And then a lot of that is unincorporated. There's a lot of there's a lot of weird pockets. So that's why we have Travis County to let this thing, you know, we don't want to have a Swiss cheese network. That's just not good for the community, because we used to do that back in the day when we were just first started, and then you got a lot of upset customers who are like, my neighbor literally has this service. And you're like, well, your neighbor lives in the City of Austin. You live in Travis County, and I know you can hit a 9-iron to their house, but like, that's just how it works. So in our process, we'll try to do more of kind of like a blanket build to be as efficient as we can. But yeah, there's going to be situations where, like you said, there's streets are right there, but ideally what we'll have is in our permitting process, we can kind of work through it. We do that today because we're already in the City of Austin. We're also in Travis County. It happens all the time.
No, but I just wondered, you're already signed off for those areas?
The blue,
Travis
yes.
County and-
Yeah, the blue, all the stuff in blue is not built. It's all in current active engineering at the moment. And that'll take 3 months-ish for all of that to get engineered and designed. And then we'll run through the permitting process. So ideally, we'll build the City of Westlake Hills, hopefully by the end of the year. My street will be the first one, hopefully. I know some people.
Two questions, Sasha. What is your optimal timeline for Rollingwood? What are you thinking about? That we know it never goes.
Yeah.
It's supposed to go. And then question for Phil is, what does council expect? Councilman McDuffie. What is council expecting from us? I know. Do you want us to do up or down, or just no, or?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice for council to get a recommendation from the utility commission one way or the other. And if there are additional concerns that you would like us to be sure we address, things of that nature, you can give us that as well. But basically, because this is a utility, we wanted to
Gotcha.
let you guys do what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, first,
Optimal?
yeah, ideally, we'll get the right-of-way, hopefully, potentially executed in the May council, depending on how much, the red lines that come back. Like, that would be, the fastest path, right? We don't want to probably go past June-ish July at that point, and like sometimes the ship might sail, right? Like if it gets too far along, then it becomes difficult to do rework, right? It's kind of like we're building the freeway system now, and we want to be able to tag everything in. It's really expensive to do this. It's extraordinarily expensive, and when you can, spread that cost on more homes, then the economics start to come back into our favor. And so that's kind of why, I was waiting for Westlake Hills to kind of fall and then come over here quickly to Rollingwood and pop in and see if the city had any interest in getting service. And I've got, like I said, I've got a dozen friends that live here and they all complain about it.
So let's assume June, and then engineering and
Engineering is probably probably 3 or 4 months. And then we would start, I'd like to start construction this year if we could. Like if you asked for my optimal timeline would be to get the right-of-way red lines in for the May session. And again, we signed that still needs permitting. And then we would start engineering. That's another 3 or 4 months. Once the first permit pack comes through, it's usually the slowest because we probably only going to do one. That's another month to 2 maybe, depending on that. And then we would start construction as part of that as well, right? And knowing that if we were able to follow that, we would know that it's coming and we could then today incorporate builds and tie-ins and everything with all of the blue to make sure that the efficiency is still there and make sure the crews kind of prioritize in terms of where they build, how they build, when they get there. We haven't done all the sequencing yet, and so the more information that we have, then we're able to properly plan for it.
I assume you're going to do all the commercial areas as well.
Yeah, that would be the plan. Correct.
So,
Yeah.
so you have some differences in the way you serve a commercial building and you cross BK Road and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, we'll a lot of that's governed by the road and if it's TxDOT and all that fun stuff on what we do. And we have different specs on depth and what we need to do from a coverage perspective and crossings. And we do railroad crossings all the time. We sign those with Texas Railroad Commission. We do culvert crossings. The part that's nice here, at least as a resident, because I'm going to live through it, right? I'm going to have to be part of this as well. Is that 10 years ago, this was kind of an experiment project. Like we were learning a lot, and there were cities lined up for the service because of how poorly performing the incumbents were. When we're in town, a couple things happen. This is for the council and to also hear as well, because I forgot to talk about it in the first meeting. The incumbents will drop their price and increase their speed, just because we announce, because they're going to be frightened to death that we're going to take their customers. So in Austin, when we announced, there were 0 fiber providers. When we said we're coming here, there's now 4 companies that offer fiber. The speeds have like quintupled in Austin since we've been here. And prices have all gone down from a kind of cost per normalization perspective, because that's a big benefit. We're big on competition. We're never the first ones. We're always second, third, fourth, or fifth, right? So when we come in, we're starting behind everybody else. And we haven't raised our price in 10 years since we started the company. It's been $70 for a gig for a decade. I honestly don't think you could name one thing in your entire life that hasn't gone up in the last 10 years, but we haven't raised it. It's kind of sacrilegious now that we're holding it, as much as we can to keep our pricing where it needs to be. So that's some benefits that you're going to get better service. Even if you're not a customer, I guarantee you Spectrum, whoever you have, is going to give you a better rate. And they're going to also increase your speeds for no price, just because they're going to be threatened. All right, so it's a big bet. The other piece is we're not reinventing the wheel. Like this is a machine that works. Like this is an assembly line. This is no longer this is a fun Google project where we're trying to learn things. This is not Google Glass where we're trying to figure out how to, revolutionize warehousing by wearing spectacles. This is a business line that's proven, that's working, and deploying, millions of feet of this every year across, a dozen or so states. And we have experience doing it in Texas. I would argue we're the most experienced company in the country, if not the world, in this deployment. There's no one else that does as much as we do across the board, the way that we do it. We're 100% fiber optic as well, so we have the experience in terms of how to deploy, how to work with that cable. And again, one of the nicer benefits is it's not you're not betting on an unknown. you're getting what the city of Austin gets. You're getting what the city of North Carolina, in Raleigh and Charlotte and San Antonio, what Orange County, Salt Lake City. So all of these cities, it's a rinse and repeat process as it kind of comes through, which comes back to the right of way. We try to keep it pretty consistent at the same time, right? So to make sure that we can be pretty efficient and not have a bunch of a la carte asks between cities. So that's, I would say, a big benefit as to the timing of it. It's probably frustrating that it took this long to get here. I know my neighborhood only has one provider. Like you literally can only get one provider. Either that or you get satellite. And so people are really thirsty for competition in certain parts of the city, and they're very excited that that we're showing up, even though it's 10 years after the city of Austin was announced.
So, one of the things I find most attractive about this is that it is buried, because we're still working on it, but we don't have great cell phone reception, and we do rely on Wi-Fi calling a lot, and when there are storms and other things, we lose that often because things hang on poles. So I think that's really attractive, that it'll be mainly buried in your estimation. But we're also going to be going through some real infrastructure upgrades on our water system. And in many places, these curb cuts and stuff running along the curb and then curb cuts to consumers' houses are potentially going to be in the same spots as water lines feeding in. And it sounds like if this were to go, you guys would go first before some of the places were done with our water lines, because that's going to take a little bit longer, is my understanding from our last meeting. And so what happens if you guys go first and then the water lines go in, and you're already closed your trench, but we hit a fiber line?
What we'll do is ideally have as much information as you guys have available before we start. And then we'll design around it to start. Let's say we design around it, we avoid 90%. 100% is probably pretty difficult. If we're in the way, then we relocate our plant. And it's that simple.
What if you don't have that information, because our plant's going to take longer than that?
And you're saying we build it with no assumption of a water project taking place?
No, there will be a water project
Yeah.
taking place.
But with no information
We're
of a
still
water.
in the engineering phase
Yeah.
too, which is going to be longer than your 3-month engineering phase, to my understanding. Is that right, Phil? Councilman McDuffie?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, this might be a little bit out of order. If we were doing it on our own,
Yeah.
we might wish to get our water infrastructure done first and then have y'all come, but you have a timeline that's more beneficial to you. And so therefore, what happens? Because when you cut stuff and you build stuff happens, as someone just said earlier tonight.
Yeah.
So somebody's going to hit your cable at some point.
Yeah. We get hit all the time. When you have millions of feet of stuff out there, it happens all. And if you've driven around Austin, there's a lot of work. We deal with ADA ramps that get put in, which is right in our kind of strike zone. We deal with new sidewalks that get put in, curb and gutter that gets put in. The city of San Antonio has approved $2.2 billion in the last 6 years in bonds, and we're right in the heat of it. So that's part of our core business. So if, let's say, we snapped our fingers today and everything was in the ground, and we had no idea about this water project, when that project comes up, we have to get out of the way. It's that simple. We have a team that gets out of the way, identify as you guys start moving forward in that project, and identify where you're going to be doing things. And if our cable's in the way, we relocate it. We can put a temp cable to get out of the way. We can relocate it to move it, not to be in conflict. But that's just kind of part of where we are. If you guys weren't doing a water project now, I can promise you'd be doing something in 2 years, in 4 years, in 8 years. Like every city we've met with, literally every single one has had something come up that says that they have a project. And I was like, that's always going to be the case. It's kind of like, well, we're not ready. We'll be ready when we're properly staffed, when we have all the funding we need, when we have the resources, when we don't have a lot of capital projects happening, when there's not a lot of growth in the city. I'm like, okay, well, has that ever happened in the history of the city? And that's where we work. Like, we're used to it. It's not an unknown for us. We aren't coming in saying, oh, there's not going to be any activity in Rollingwood. Like, we know that. We know there's going to be activity in Travis County, in Austin, in Round Rock, Texas, in Georgetown, in San Antonio. Like, it's happening today. And we have an entire department. Their whole job is to address those situations. Yeah.
Right.
So there's a full department for that. But we would love to know more. Like, if that's happening, we'd probably want to talk to the water engineers and say, hey, ideally, what are y'all doing? What's happening? When's it happening? How do you think it's going to go down? And if they just give us some directional stuff, we can probably do, some creative things to get out of the way and avoid being hit. Because we don't want to relocate. Like, we want to do it right the first time and then be done. And if that means we go a little slower, or we spend a little bit more money to go deeper, or we just make some decisions to be a little bit more resilient, we'd rather do that. And then when the water project comes through, just kind of swipes on in. So
Presumably that information can be shared with our engineering team that's working on the water project. As far as mapping, you guys do you share that information? You might say, here it is, here's a picture, but then take it back, or you say, here it is, we just mapped out your whole city. If you guys are working on a project, you can see where everything's going to be.
well, when we do a permit, it's all public record anyway. So yeah, it's kind of one
The
of those.
sooner we get this done, the sooner it can be incorporated potentially into any plan for the water project.
Yeah, we don't advertise to our competitors where we're going. Like, that's, for obvious reasons, but at the end of the day, like, we're working with jurisdictions that are all public record availability. And so, people know what's happening, but we don't want to just like drop flyers on our deployment schedule and stuff like that.
And the timeline was mentioned, but that is assuming the yellow becomes blue. That is a timeline for the blue, right? Not the timeline for the yellow alone, right? So it's once you start working on fixing or installing all around the blue, at some point we'll figure out when the rolling would
Correct.
begin,
Yeah.
but that could be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
does that look like?
Yeah, and we have, if it gets feathered in, we can reprioritize. Like, we can move things in the queue. There's stuff that's happening in Round Rock, Texas today that's in a certain spot in the construction funnel and the snake and all that, right? If yellow gets signed, we'll just feather, we want to get in as soon as we can, just because right now we're working within the blue with the understanding that there's going to be a big donut in the yellow, right? And that's where we are. So if we get the right-of-way signed, which is kind of the first step, then we're like, okay, let's now work through everything else, and we can incorporate that. And because Rollingwood's smaller, it's, we do that probably, we probably build, I don't know, 5 Rollingwoods a week in Texas. Like, that's how much we do. And so
It's only going to take us a week?
yeah. That's the state of Texas, like, full operation. Yeah. So if we it only take you actually one day, if you look at it, like what we produce. We probably do like a Rollingwood a day to a degree in terms of construction linear footage. So we have the ability to kind of flex our group around, which is why I wanted to get in front of Ashley and council and everyone to say, hey, take your time. Like, it's fine. Being a resident nearby, I understand that people want to get information, but I didn't want to come in, and say, hey, oh, sorry, you guys have, like, I came as soon as Westlake Hills signed, like, Ashley got an email and was like, hey, this just happened. And then luckily I was able to hop on the April council agenda and be like, here's where we are. I want to give everyone as much time as we can to kind of move forward. Ideally, we could spend more time on the permitting side, right? Because that means at least, like, we know that there's a path that folks want to see it, and there's a lot of green around here. People can go look at it and see if they like it or not, right? And it's I would say it's one of the more critical infrastructure kind of amenities in today's world. Like, people, if you asked them 10 years ago, rank water, gas, sewage, internet, TV, 1 through 5, it would be a certain degree. If you ask them today, there's people that might say, hey, I'll be cold for a couple days, just don't take my internet away from me. So for us, that's why we want to make sure that we can get in front of the community and be as transparent as possible.
I had a question about when you transition from the trunk lines to the distribution lines. Is there some ground-mounted equipment, a junction box or something?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We will have usually boxes like this that transition that. They'll have like
So they'll
splitters
all
enclosed.
be
All be
underground
underground.
with
Yeah.
a cap on.
Yeah, everything
Okay.
will be underground, and you're right. Like, there'll be a big count cable that kind of comes in, and then it starts splintering off, and then in that box you'll have a big splitter that distributes that as it kind of comes through. So yeah, it's there are areas where we'll have these are the residential boxes. There'll be some, maybe a few other bigger boxes in certain spots depending on what the design looks like and feels like.
Okay.
Bill, is the hope that we make a decision here today for you for your next meeting? I'm just trying to understand
That's a hope.
timing. Okay.
I mean, if you guys feel like you're ready, I would like a vote on a recommendation to council, some form of action.
And the understanding is you would have a recommendation from the utility commission, but council still ultimately is running a process
Absolutely.
and is in deep discussion around all of the aspects of the right-of-way, the permitting process, et cetera.
Ultimately, council is responsible.
Yeah, and the way it historically has worked is we'll come and talk to a group like this. Yeah.
So you're looking for we recommend that council either negatively or positively receives this proposal? I don't know how to
I think we're
word it.
looking for utility commission would support council in supporting if their decision was to support the right-of-way, we would feel comfortable having given the information, the same information, or at least the same initial information that council had when reviewing. So if I guess more to the point, if there are some strong objections, I think now would be the time to say there are very strong objections and I, for whatever reason, and won't support it, but if you'd like to make a motion in one way or the other, I'll either say yay or nay or have it, but I think that they're looking for some sort of decision today.
Yeah, and I'll just provide, because you made a good point about an ordinance. There's some ordinances that we have to work around. So the intent is that we'll find a path towards that, right? So the right-of-way to say, we'll come and speak to utility commission and they'll ask, more technical questions. Then council will, ultimately make a decision and the city staff will make a recommendation. So you could have yes, 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 no. You could have no, 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 yes. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that kind of take place. But we would have to, if we sign the right-of-way, we would still have to work through all those pieces and say, hey, we need the noise ordinance to be, loosened up between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. to allow for us to actually work. And then after that time, we'll turn things off. You can work Monday through Saturday, no Sunday work or no Saturday work. We'll figure all that stuff out as in the spirit of the agreement. And then permitting will then outline all of that, right? The permit will say, here are your working hours, here's when you can do all that type of stuff. So there isn't a sense of we've lost, by saying yes, you lose any level of control, right, in the process. That's just, you signed a contract to have this, you've got a credit card in your hand. You can never swipe it ever, but if you do, you know what the rules of engagement are. And that's where we'll get to from a permitting perspective to make sure that everything's clearly outlined in terms of how we cut, when we cut, how we backfill, the hours that we can work, as well as kind of communications with residents.
One question, and then I'll make a motion if you don't mind, assuming no other questions or thoughts. Every contract, there's benefits and burdens. What does the city, and I think the answer is nothing, get out of this, other than the opportunity to residents to buy your service?
Yeah, the city gets a couple things. One, improved infrastructure for the residents, right? So the residents will have availability to, I would say, the best product available in the country to a degree, right? That's kind of the first and foremost. The second thing is there is a right-of-way fee that comes along with it. That's just, it's mailbox money to the city that comes in. One thing, and I didn't mention this in the council meeting because A, I ran out of time, B, I didn't think about it, so maybe just B, that you get a right-of-way fee currently from your current providers, right? They're all working on a video agreement, which means that you're only getting a fee based on the video money that comes from it. So if you have a household that's an internet customer and not and they're streaming YouTube TV or Hulu, and they're paying $0 in right-of-way fees, where ours is linked to every single customer will be paying a right-of-way fee that comes back because of how our agreements are set up. So there is a scenario where if every single resident of Rollingwood today cord cutted, like you guys have heard that phrase before, then the right-of-way fee here goes to zero, overnight. Just because the way the franchise is structured is they're working under a video franchise. They don't have to have any customers using it. They just have to say, we offer video, and then they can work under that franchise agreement. So that would be the second piece. There is a right-of-way agreement that outlines, money that comes in, and that's in perpetuity. That stays with the life of
Say
the.
what that is, or is that?
Historically, it's been 1%. Right, so it's 1% in all of the areas that we're working with in Texas, and then I oversee Colorado as well. Yes, 1% gross, and I oversee Colorado as well. You can't do that in Colorado, so they have a different mechanism on how they do things because they legally aren't allowed to charge right-of-way fees in Colorado. So every state's a bit different. Texas, our standard's been 1%, and again, that is on every single customer pays that, and it doesn't depend on what service that they have.
So, I promised a motion.
Floor is yours.
City, but it comes from.
Yeah, it comes from us, it's,
Yeah.
I know.
It's a rebate.
Exactly. Move for approval from the utility commission of the plan as presented with the proviso that the noise ordinance gets considered by council, because it's gotten way out of hand, just on construction and building and everything else. And 60 is not the right number, but we need a number, and we ought to look at that. And I think I'm gonna come to council at some point and say, look, let's get a number.
Yeah, I would love to have that happen.
And make it reasonable, and we don't want to be no bill, but reasonable bill, because some people work from home and it's just.
Before we ask for a second and have a vote, I just want to confirm with Phil, you've heard the wording of this motion. Do you think that this motion satisfies what council is looking for from the commission, or is there stronger language required and or needed to kind of communicate what we're trying to do here? So maybe I'll reword it because it sounds.
Go ahead.
It seems like you were looking for us to say that we support how council would choose to move forward with this, which is
Well,
basically we're not.
You see no obstructions.
Yes, we're not getting in the way, but we're leaving the decision to council.
Right. Yeah, like you would support council continuing to negotiate and consider, moving forward with Google Fiber.
That's
Something
even
like
better.
So-
than what I
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So, to reword it perhaps, so the motion is for the utility commission to support city council's ongoing efforts with regard to the right-of-way for Google Fiber, with the caveat that there is at least some consideration given to the noise
Noise
ordinance.
That sounds
All right, I'll second that.
We have a second and a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
All ayes. So the motion passes. Thank you, Sasha, very much. Appreciate all the information. I do know that if anyone on this commission has any questions, that they will reach out to council and or to you directly. We will certainly want to make sure that questions, and we know a lot will come up, do get addressed, but appreciate everyone's consideration today and support. And with that, I think we can adjourn.
I have one more thing
Oh,
to
we
bring
can
up.
reverse that
And
adjournment.
I probably should have thought about bringing this up and letting you know earlier. I'm doing a temporary short-term gig for Austin Energy to help them evaluate their review of what went wrong during the ice storm, which is really a continuation of what went wrong in 2021.
No.
And if Rollingwood, the citizens, or this commission has any ideas on that, at some point I would like for them to come around and make a presentation about what the plan is. Right now they're just doing an evaluation of what were their expectations and what really happened. And then the plan is to put procedures and policies and systems in place so that their expectations are met. And it's the right expectations that are going to be met. And then the third phase would be to implement all of that.
Why don't we work offline with Ashley, either putting something on the agenda to talk about that broadly, or to plan it offline and then
Yeah.
just put it on the agenda as a conversation
Yeah.
to have. Great. Well, with that, I'll adjourn officially.
Okay.
Unless we already did.
Thank you.
That was easy.